All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. We're here in our final segment for today's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. And joining us for this segment is my colleague, Stacy McFeeters, out in Amherst, Massachusetts, who is here to help talk to us about the role of college finance in determining fit. So fit is a really interesting concept when we talk about the college selection process. We're talking about location and size and activities and major and all of these different things. But I think, Stacy, that often families don't think about financial fit in the same kind of way. It almost seems like an afterthought. It's not a part of the process of choosing colleges as they go. And so I want to spend some time today talking about financial fit, both for juniors and seniors, because things have changed quite a bit in the last couple of weeks as it pertains to seniors. But let's start with our initial planned conversation, which is to talk a little bit about juniors.
Okay, that sounds great.
And the role of sort of how financial fit, enters into this process. So just to start with, do families have sort of absolute yes, consider these schools, and no, don't consider these schools based on price lists? Is that a good place to start, or is there, I'm imagining, a little more nuance in that process?
So there's a lot more nuance in that process.
Okay.
So the answer to the question is kind of interesting, because if you had said to me, do families come to you with an absolute notion, yes, apply to these schools based on cost, or no, don't apply to these schools based on cost? They do that all the time.
Yeah.
But the actual answer to the question is, I would never have a family eliminate a school based on their sticker price at the beginning of the process. I think we all know that there's a lot of things that go into financing a college education, including the monies that are being offered elsewhere. And ultimately, it's not what the sticker is on the price of that window at that college. It's what ultimately you as a family would pay out of pocket. So that's always what we want to drive families to.
Right. And I think that there are families that understand that better than others. Yeah. And in my experience, at least, it seems like the families that often can benefit most from institutional aid or from scholarships are the ones who are turning away from colleges because of that sticker price. So just as a definition, sticker price and net price, what are the differences there, and how can families try and find the gap between those two numbers and what that's going to mean for them?
Yeah, so sticker price is exactly what it sounds like. When you go onto a college website, you take a look at their costs, and they're going to tell you their tuition and fees are X, their estimated room and board is Y, and then they're even going to give you estimates for books and supplies and transportation and all of those things. That's really the sticker. That's sort of the cost. The real costs are obviously the tuition and fees and the room and board if the student lives on campus. The net price is actually the difference between that sticker price and what you obviously subtract from that any money that you might be offered from the school in sort of free form. And what I mean by that is if you've been awarded any merit scholarships or any need-based grant aid or a combination of those things, when you subtract that from the sticker price, you're going to actually have your net price. Your net price is what you need to be looking at. You won't know your net price when just opening, your computer or your guide to schools for the first time. So that's why I always say to families, don't eliminate anything. Let's get into the process. And then once we start, we can determine whether or not we think it sort of falls into your family's, fit spectrum from a finance perspective.
And so could you theoretically just grab 100 students at a particular campus and see that they are paying 100 different amounts in terms
Absolutely.
of their tuition bills?
Absolutely.
So, and that's all based on scholarship packages, maybe need-based financial aid calculations, all of those things. And so I think some people will say, well, this school costs this much and that's it. Right. But the reality is that for every student, there's potentially a different price associated with what their attendance is going to be.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me giving you an example,
Sure.
When I was director of financial aid, I worked at a particular college where our single largest competitor was one of our state universities. So I think when people think about cost, the first thing they think of is, well, we're going to go with in-state public because it's cheapest.
Right.
And the reality is that's not always true. At the sticker value, probably it is. But a lot of schools, like the school that I was the director of financial aid at, part of the job of the financial aid director and or admissions person is to bring students in that they want to attend the most. And often that would mean me bringing our sticker price lower than our state competitor by virtue of grants and scholarships. So I think that's what families need to understand is, everybody knows what, that a public school is sort of cheaper, but at the end of the day, they're never awarding the same quantities of dollars that their private counterparts are. So often I see it every day where families assume that their state school would have been cheaper, but at the end of the day, the private schools with their full mix of offering ultimately became less expensive than the state counterpart.
And then private schools can be strategic because they can often count on what that public cost is going to be. They can
100%.
look at a particular student and say, all right, let's try and get underneath that number.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that I've always been a little bit foggy on is these net price calculators are obviously really good at need-based financial aid because you can plug in some information about your income and they'll tell you what you might qualify for.
Yep.
What is the role of scholarships in a net price calculator? Is there a way to enter in things like test scores or GPA or other things that might qualify for a scholarship? Or is it really a wait and see when you get an offer of admission what that package is going to look like?
That's an awesome question. So just to circle back, Net Price Calculator is basically a tool that every school is required to have on their website that will, in essence, give families an estimate of what they might qualify for in aid. And I'm using the word aid loosely. Generally speaking, every school will tell you what your need-based financial aid eligibility would be. Very few schools tie into that their merit scholarships as well. There are some. So here's my rule of thumb for folks, or pro tip, is if when you're entering your information into the net price calculator, which I encourage every family to do at every school that they're considering, if you're only entering financial information, you're not going to see merit. If they're also asking you for the student's GPA and test scores, you're probably going to get a pretty good merit estimate. Don't assume if you don't see merit that they don't offer it. So, it's a little tricky to get a really good net price. But just know that, that's one place to look. Check the school's websites in other places to see if they might list what their private scholarships are. They just don't share the criteria.
So let's say you and I are working together with a family and I'm on the admission side, you're on the college finance side, and I'm working with them on their college list. And so we've got the no problem schools, the just right schools, the challenging schools, all across the list. Where does the college finance portion sort of enter into that process? I'm going to help them look at, let's consider different academic options and methods of teaching and extracurricular activities. And we're going to put that into a spreadsheet and do a lot of research. But that can't exist just on its own, right? I mean, we have to also fold in this college finance piece. So where does that come into play, and how do we give that the same level of attention as we're giving these other things?
So fantastic question. And I give you full credit for understanding that working together on this works the best. And I've had the good fortune of working with you in this way. So really what we want to do is we want to consider every school on the list and whether or not, based on what they offer, that school becomes financially viable. Now, financially viable and financial fit are two different things, but you've got to understand viability first, right? So what I mean by that is, let's just say, for example, I'd love to use the examples. We're a family that knows they're not going to qualify for any need-based aid. So without merit scholarships, the sticker price is pretty close to what they're going to pay. But they're financially sensitive. So you might come to me and say, here's a list. There's 4 schools that are challenging, 4 just right, 4 that are no problem. Off the top, I can tell you those 4 challenging schools are probably not going to yield them merit. Because when you think about merit scholarships, you want to remember that merit scholarships are really the money that schools use to recruit the students that they want the most. If it's a challenge for that student, probably not going to be sort of their prime candidate. So I then have the family focus on those other 2 categories, probably more so the no problem than anything else. And then invite them to accept that maybe a very significant scholarship from a no problem school might make it as attractive to you as a family in the long run because of the financial viability. Then financial fit is sort of the other piece. And I'll just touch on this for 1 second. We can expand. When I talk about financial fit, one of the things I really urge families to do as early as possible, junior year, sophomore year, freshman year, think about as a family what you believe you can pay for in terms of college and set that price in your mind. Have the conversation with the student so that we're not sitting on April 9th trying to make a decision in their senior year when you realize, wow, we shouldn't have seen this all the way through. We can't afford this.
Right.
Have the conversation early. And that means, you might say, this is our number, but it doesn't mean you only look for schools that cost that. You now take everything that we've talked about to say, does that school cost that for us? And that's where fit also comes into play.
That's right. And I think that, sometimes you'll see families that will, I think there's a difference between smart planning around the list and saying, these no problem schools are likely to offer me merit if that's a policy that they have, and sort of hoping, right?
Yep.
To say,
Yep.
well, let's see if the school comes up with a particular kind of offer that we're surprised by and it connects the dots. I mean, how do you sort of advise families to think about the concept of applying to a school that looks like it's going to be sticker price high, but they're not sure what the cost is going to be? Do you discourage that, or do you say, let's see what comes in? Like, how do they sort of draw lines around that part of the process, if that makes sense?
So the good news, if families are working with us, we have a very significant amount of experience in this area. So there are a lot of schools, vast majority of schools that we can take a look at and say, yeah, I think that from your qualifications and what we've seen historically and what they offer, we feel confident that you would be offered some merit.
Sure.
So when we take that sort of question and then we say, okay, if we think you're going to qualify for merit and it brings it in range of what you as a family think you might be able to do, I would say go for it, roll the dice. But I also urge, as do you, in all the ways, don't get your heart set on a school until you've done all the work. So you've applied everywhere. You've done all of your due diligence from the academic and admission perspective. You've done everything from the finance perspective. And now you're sitting down and making your decision, which I know you've already talked about today, and you're looking at everything. That's when you make the decision as to whether or not you want to leave the school in or not. But again, if your heart is set on something and the finances don't work out, you've got to be willing to walk away.
And that raises an important question, which is, sort of our final piece of this today, which is that you can have a family that at this point in time has done everything right. They've considered financial fit. They have had the conversation, and that's now April.
Yep.
The markets have tanked. Maybe people are being laid off. How does that concept of financial fit shift dramatically, or should it, in this period of time? How do you think about sort of the coming months and years ahead now that things are very different?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that obviously we're dealing with every day. And I think the reality is you as a family need to sort of almost, reconsider what your initial fit was and think down the road, could you find yourselves back in that position? Not today, maybe not even this year, but in the sort of scope of time that you had envisioned, can you still make that financial fit work? And that doesn't mean 4 years. It could mean that you as a family decide to finance, and that financing might be 10 years. If that you feel is still comfortable enough to you, then I think you can take that leap. If you are absolutely not certain and you just, have all the fears that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of options. But I think every family making decisions right now needs to remember what their original perspective was. Visit where they feel like they are today. Visit where they feel like they're going to be next year, the year after, and the year after that. And I think in some ways you might find yourselves back at your original perspective. And if you don't, find where you think you're going to be comfortable. And I think we've said this in every instance. Also, reach out to the schools that you're working with. They're responding. Just 20 minutes ago, I saw a note from a family that I was working with that had some very significant changes in the last 4 weeks. Their dream school stepped up. So just have the conversations. They're prepared to have them. The worst they can say is maybe it won't work out.
I love the way, so many of my colleagues on the finance side of the desk have talked about communication. And I think that it's just so important to underscore that colleges are receptive. They want to help you make things work, and everybody's in this together in this situation. So we understand where it's coming from. And I think, high school kids are understanding it too. And so it's a great opportunity to have those conversations with your kids. Stacey, thanks for joining us. That was a great segment. It was great to see you as well.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
All right.
Be well, folks, everyone.
Yeah, that does it for today's show. And we hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Maybe you learned a little something in the process. We always hope for that. Remember, if you'd like to add a face to the voices and you're a podcast listener, you can make your way to our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/collegecoach. And we post videos of our radio show segments each week. Next week is an exciting show with an all-external lineup of guests. So Beth Heaton's going to be back. She's unpacking the biggest myths of the college admission process. She's going to dive into the ROTC options for students. And they'll actually be taking a deeper look at institutional financial health with our friends over at Admit. So it's a trio of really terrific guests, and you won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep safe, stay home, and wash your hands. And we'll see you here next week.
All clear. Great show, guys.